But no matter what happened, I had a great comfort that besides the tears of mourning from my family, the greatest comfort was the tears of my girlfriend, happy and proud. Indeed, I do not remember how many days and nights it took us to reach the final stop of the journey, which was Song. Then station, I do not know what time it was at night. Then Brother Xwan and Vinpai and I were too tired, so the three of us spread raincoats on the floor of the waiting hall and slept sprawled out. Early the next morning, Brother Xwan parted ways with the two of us to go to the division base somewhere. I was not clear about leaving Vintuak and me as companions when paying for the Lambretta ride. Alas, the wallet was still in my pocket, but the money had flown away without wings. I did not know who had the heart to take my meager amount of money saved to buy some tobacco for the unit as gifts for the brothers. So from that day on, I clung to Vintuak like a shadow, because I did not have a single penny left in my pocket and had no acquaintances in this Saigon either. Then Vinch and I went to the house of Vine's relative to stay for free. This family were workers, so their economy was also very tight. Every morning, both husband and wife went to work, leaving only him and me at home. Getting bored after staying here for 2 days, the two of us agreed to return to the unit, deciding so. The next morning, when waking up, Vin asked his relatives for some rice to cook breakfast, and with the other half, the two of us diligently molded a big ball of rice to eat on the road. So both of us went to the Western bus station and caught a bus to T9. At about 2 p.m. the bus stopped at a military control station for inspection. This station was the same station I passed when taking the bus back last time. At that time the military control forced me and Vine off the bus. Now I had the chance to observe carefully. The station was located on a gentle hill surrounded by no trees or civilian houses behind the station. There was a row of houses where they took me and Vinchuak inside there. A young officer asked us about our unit designation and where we were going. Now, I do not remember how Vin answered, but I said I was in the hospital in Saigon but lost all papers and was now returning to the unit, just explaining in a roundabout way for a while. Meanwhile, outside the driver kept honking impatiently. It took about more than 20 minutes later for that officer to let us go back to the bus, not forgetting to lecture us about regulations and military bearing, and he also made me cut all my fingernails because the nails on my 10 fingers and toes were a bit long, and also my hair was a bit long, but because there were no scissors there, we had to let it slide. Otherwise, if there were scissors, Vin and I would definitely have been held down and had all our hair cut off. We continued the journey until about more than 3 p.m. when we got off the bus at the Godo intersection. Then the two of us caught a tractor trailer with traders running toward the Mok Bay border gate. That evening, the two of us did not go to the Mok Bay post, but turned into a brick factory located on the right side, heading west about nearly 1 kilometer from the post, asking the workers at the brick kiln for a place to sleep. It was also just when the workers were preparing to have dinner, so the two of us were also invited to share their meal. My impression of that meal was the grilled snakehead fish. How delicious it was. That night we hung out with the worker brothers and sisters until late, before going to sleep. The two of us were arranged a bed, lying there remembering back when getting on the bus. Because we had no money, the two of us just sat there stubbornly refusing to get off when the bus assistant kept insisting on kicking us off. Then, thanks to the voices of the mothers on that bus trip, we were left alone, and the driver also nodded, agreeing to help the two soldiers. Seeing the two of us, two soldiers, looking like no one else, perhaps they also pitied us because of the battle to protect the border on the bus at that time. The mothers also gave us food, seeing the two of us break the rice ball in half and holding 2 packets of soup base to dip the rice in. Everyone also invited us to drink sugarcane juice and smoke tobacco. I still remember the man sitting right next to me, chatting very openly, asking about my hometown, knowing I was from the north. Although it seemed he had never known what the north was like when getting off the bus, he even shoved a handful of tobacco into my hand, so I hid that handful of tobacco deep in the bottom of my backpack as a gift for the brothers in the unit, while I just smoked tobacco begged from Cambodian soldiers or civilians on the way to the unit. Then I fell asleep without knowing when. Early the next morning, the two of us went back to the Mok Bay border gate to catch a ride to Phnom Penh at about 7 a.m., seeing a convoy of civilian transport trucks from Ho Chi Minh City carrying goods to Cambodia. We were helped by the border guard soldiers to hitch a ride, so another journey into danger and death began. The emotions when the truck passed through familiar places that in the early period when we were new to the battlefield felt so nostalgic. Bavet 1, Bavet 2, then Svay Rieng, places where our unit had fierce battles to protect sacred meters of land of the fatherland. Blood and bones of our comrades had been poured down here a lot now. Life here had stabilized. The atmosphere was truly peaceful, but at the end of the faraway country of Cambodia, sweat and even blood of Vietnamese volunteer soldiers were still pouring down every hour every day to protect the peace for the Cambodian people. That afternoon at about 5 p.m., we arrived in Phnom Penh City. The two of us got off the truck and walked for a while, turning toward the direction of Road 5. By late afternoon, the two of us managed to find a Vietnamese volunteer unit, but it belonged to the administrative block, asking for food and a place to sleep. An officer came out to ask us very thoroughly about our unit and where the two of us were going. We just answered that we had just returned from the hospital and were on the way back to the unit. A while later, seeing them call the guard soldiers to give us a room with 2 beds to rest and lead us to the kitchen for dinner that night. Both of us wanted to stroll around the city a bit, but dared not step past the guard gate, because seeing their soldiers guarding very strictly, we did not want to cause trouble, and honestly we were tired too, so the two of us just went to hang out with the guard brothers, mainly to bum cigarettes from them. Indeed, they were rear echelon soldiers living the good life, unlike us frontline soldiers who worked our faces off day after day, month after month, lacking everything, while here they lacked nothing. Rice was white and delicious, plus meat and fresh vegetables. Clothes always looked neat, tucked in. Every soldier's appearance was shining, unlike us combat soldiers, whose faces looked like we lost our ration cards. Oh, and why did I smoke so strangely today? Puffing greedily as if afraid someone would take my share. Then, when saying goodbye to the guard soldiers to go rest, I even tiptoed to pull 2 more cigarettes to save for later. Early the next morning, while we were still drowsy, there was a knock on the door, waking us up after finishing breakfast. We were led by a guard soldier toward the direction of Road 5 to a Cambodian soldier guard post. After talking with the Cambodian soldiers for a while, the guard soldier told us to sit and wait at the guard post. Whenever there was a truck going to Battambang, the Cambodian soldiers would ask for a ride for us. Truly, they were too enthusiastic toward us frontline soldiers. Thank you very much. Hello, Vietnamese compatriots. We sat waiting there for about an hour when seeing a convoy of Cambodian transport trucks carrying goods to Battambang, not knowing what goods they carried because they were covered tightly with canvas. But on the truck we saw many Cambodian traders. The two of us sat on the truck mixed with the traders. When the truck passed Cambodian guard posts, it also had to stop for inspection, but honestly I did not see any inspection. It seemed they got down to pay the toll or something, because while sitting on the truck I saw the assistant driver jump down and shove something into the guard's hand. Then the barrier was lifted immediately, and the truck continued the journey. I do not know if they were Cambodian police or military control. I only saw them wearing light yellow uniforms and caps. The truck continued rolling on Road 5, the road too familiar to us, starting from Kampong Shnang up to Persat. I felt like watching a slow-motion movie of our unit in the early days, when we were fresh on this land. The truck passed the place where several of our tanks were burnt. Some Cambodian traders pointed there and turned to look at us, laughing smirkingly at that time, getting furious. Vine that glared and scolded them back in Cambodian. I saw those guys looking wary, and then they shut up. The atmosphere on the truck also fell silent, and so from there up to Battambang the two of us had to keep our mouths shut and hold our cravings, because there were no more fragrant cigarettes offered by the Cambodians. The truck started to run slower because the road was bad. Starting from the green forest upwards was the area familiar to us. Also on this very road we had patrolled many times to protect supply convoys here or there, each time waiting for trucks to pass safely before returning, missing so much those who had to lie down here sleepless nights, penetrating deep, poking into the pot basin leash, but then encountering their defensive line, having to leave martyrs behind to bring the wounded back, missing so much comrades, loving so much those who sacrificed the truck. Past the high bridge near the entrance to Persat, this bridge also held many memories for me. Right here our unit had fierce bloody battles to stop the enemy's intention to retake Persat town, then the battle to retake the outpost of Company 18 Knights, penetrating deep, poking through enemy outposts into their rear to grasp the situation. Memories of Road 5, never to be forgotten. That evening, the truck stopped to rest in Persat. The two of us again went to a Vietnamese volunteer unit asking for food and a place to sleep. Here the atmosphere was war, so the streets were not lively in the evening. Very few people were on the streets, generally a sad scene. The next morning, after having breakfast with the brothers in the friendly unit, we agreed that by noon we would catch a ride to Battambang, because Vin Toak was then going to look for a friend stationed nearby. Leaving me alone, feeling bored, I wandered around visiting places where my unit and I had passed a time of smoke and fire. Walking along the Persat River, I went north on both riverbanks, seeing civilians had returned in numbers, but the trading scene was not very bustling. The further north went, the sparser the civilian houses became, so I hesitated and turned back. At about 10:30 a.m. Vinch returned. We finished lunch. and then said goodbye to the brothers going out to the road to catch a ride. Luckily at that time, there were 2 Vietnamese military trucks on the way to Battambang. We asked to get on the truck bed, not knowing what goods they carried because they were covered tightly with canvas. There was a group of soldiers carrying guns, not knowing if they were protecting the truck or going on a mission, but that was reassuring enough. From Pursat up to Battambang on both sides of the road, civilian dwellings were still very sparse. Occasionally we encountered outposts of Vietnamese volunteer soldiers and also Cambodian soldiers. They had the duty to patrol and protect the road. Trucks passing key bridges had Vietnamese volunteer soldiers posted to protect the bridge, not knowing if the pot troops often ambushed trucks or destroyed bridges, but looking at the bunkers knowing that. Brothers in the rear at this time also had to be very vigilant against the enemy's sneaky bite tactics. The car stopped for a break along the road. I don't remember the exact location. The comrades on the truck invited us to rest and drink water. The 2 of us had 2 delicious glasses of sugarcane juice, and we were even offered Samix cigarettes. I had to admit those soldiers looked well kept. After chatting for a while, we continued our journey. The 2 of us hitchhiked on the truck like honored guests. We smoked their cigarettes without any class distinction, and we were offered water in their canteens as the 2 of us had nothing at the time. Late in the afternoon, the truck arrived at the eastern side of Battambang City. The 2 of us got off when the truck turned into the headquarters of Military Region 7 or perhaps Division 3, I don't clearly recall, located east of the Battambang River. The 2 of us then parted ways. A day in Battambang, Vin went to the rear base of his Regiment 250 to visit while I crossed the bridge and went to the nursing/treatment station to look for fellow townsmen or comrades from my unit. I didn't meet any townsmen or anyone from my unit, only a few acquaintances. I then went over to Battalion 250 where there were soldiers from the 74 intake who were my fellow townsmen. That evening I ate and stayed overnight at Battalion 250. Since there was no transport to Quo Chu Vi yet, I had to stay in Battambang for 1 more day. In my free time, I went sightseeing in the city with a few friends who were recuperating. We walked north along the riverbank and just kept going. I must admit this city was truly sprawling. The shops had already reappeared and were quite bustling. Traders from all places poured in, combined with the Vietnamese volunteer soldiers, so the place was always crowded. Notably, the locals were using Honda bicycles, a type of bicycle that to my knowledge had not yet appeared in Vietnam. The Cambodian young men and women rode their bicycles, zooming around. The city was so peaceful in contrast to our soldiers who were just a few dozen kilometers away, enduring hardship hour after hour, day after day, with life and death calculated by the second and minute to protect this peaceful life. The few of us stopped at a drink stall to rest. The proprietress, only a little over 30 years old, was fair-skinned and plump. I don't know if she was half Vietnamese or half Chinese. She came out to serve us the sugarcane juice we ordered. We sat and chatted happily. Everyone was happy for me because I had been able to stop by home. Meanwhile, in the back, I saw the shadow of a man who occasionally lifted the curtain to peep at us. I didn't know if he was Vietnamese or Cambodian. When we were tired of wandering, we returned. My friends went back to the nursing station and I returned to Battalion 250. Reunion at Ndong in the afternoon. A supply truck was heading up to the Forward Division headquarters at Quo Chu Vi. I followed the truck. Getting off the truck, I went into Battalion 240 to look for people from my unit. Here I met a few guys from our 20th Company who were being treated for wounds and malaria. We were delighted to see each other. I asked about the situation of the unit, who was still there and who was lost. They said there were no current fatalities, but many had hit mines. The unit was still stationed in the same position, but there were very few soldiers left, just a handful. The guys regretted that I hadn't stayed home longer, but they didn't understand me at the time. I felt so out of place at home, but back in the unit, the affection of my comrades felt much warmer. Al from Hivat and I, both from the same company, agreed that as soon as a truck or the Samlot area was available, we would take the ride back to the unit. Noon the next day, a VTN truck arrived carrying malaria patients, wounded soldiers, and the bodies of fallen soldiers from Ndong. So Thane and I boarded the truck along with a few of our escort soldiers and some comrades returning to the unit from the hospital. On the truck, only the soldiers on duty had weapons. The rest of us returning from the hospital were unarmed. The truck drove through the deciduous dipterocarp forests, occasionally interspersed with tropical forests. Along this route there were occasional road checkpoints manned by subordinate units and the artillery units of Regiment 55. It was the dry season, so the road condition wasn't too bad. The bluff with the banana tree. The truck arrived at the Andong T junction around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. This area was the Forward Division headquarters. To the west of the division headquarters was a high mountain range. Presumably some element was stationed on the mountain. Otherwise, if the Pol Pot forces occupied the mountain, they would control the entire T-junction area and the road leading to the San/Sam lot. We got off the truck here. Now only the two of us remained for the road to Regiment 266. The other comrades were soldiers from Regiment 270. The distance was only about 5 or 6 kilometers, but the two sides were dense with bananas and fruit trees, and there was no outpost. Meanwhile, the two of us didn't have a single piece of metal weapon in our hands. If we ran into the Pol Pot forces, the only way would probably be to run into the jungle to hide, but honestly, the chance of escape would be very slim. Suddenly, Thang came up with an idea that still makes me laugh every time I think about it. He took a small banana sapling, unpeeled, which looked dark, sharpened the front end, and left the butt end whole. The butt end of the banana sapling flared out, looking from a distance exactly like a P.3 rocket launcher. He used a small, sharp homemade knife made from an AK ammunition clip to fashion the banana. So the two of us trudged back to the unit. He walked in front, brandishing the makeshift P.3, while I followed him about 10 meters behind my face, constantly turning pale, my feet stepping quickly and my heart probably beating louder than a village drum. The sun had set, and only the light on the road remained. The forest on both sides was already dark. Honestly, I was very, very scared, but I had already committed and couldn't turn back. We had already covered more than half the distance. Turning back now wouldn't help either. So we decided to close our eyes and take a risk. If at that moment even a random burst of gunfire had been fired, I swear the two of us would have run faster than a horse. Back at the outpost, closer, we were getting close to the 12.4 outpost of Regiment 250. My 2 feet were tripping over themselves, desperate to sprint, but my mind forced itself to say no. Don't run, you have to show you're not afraid, or they'll ridicule us when we get back to the unit. When we were about 10 meters from the unit's bunker, the two of us stopped and rested for a bit to calm our nerves and regain our composure before continuing. From here to our company was only about 1 kilometer, but there was nothing to worry about because we knew the terrain. Besides, at that time, a few soldiers from a friendly unit were accompanying us, heading out to set mines on the road to prevent the enemy from attacking along that route at night. They set the mines at night and defused them in the morning. When we were only a few hundred meters from our unit's outpost, we parted ways with the friendly unit's comrades. When we could no longer clearly see people's faces, the two of us arrived. The two of us went straight into the company headquarters. The commanders had finished dinner and were sitting and talking. They were delighted to see the two of us, asking us all sorts of questions. Mr. Fuang, the deputy company commander, asked repeatedly, "Why were you at the hospital for so long?" I told him the truth, that I had stopped by home for a bit. No one said anything. Mr. Bayo, the company commander, even remarked, "Well, you're luckier than us, you know. Some 74 intake soldiers here haven't even had leave once, and you awarded yourself leave. That's perfect, and you even managed to find your way back to the unit." Leaving a small amount of tea and tobacco for the company headquarters, I returned to the platoon stationed on the west side of the road. A warm welcome the moment they saw me. The comrades' eyes widened in disbelief, thinking I had disappeared for good. No one could have guessed I would return to the unit. Honestly, at that moment, a few guys asked me why I was so stupid not to just disappear and why I came back here. After the visit home, a decision I signed myself, which involved a rather arduous journey filled with many memories and longings, the first thing I did upon arriving at the unit was rush to the company command to report my presence. At the time, I was worried about being scolded for forging my own leave papers, but luckily the commanders were very understanding and decided to let it go. I remember the company commander even exclaimed, "Even the 74 intake soldiers haven't had leave yet, and you gave yourself leave, that's perfect, and you even found your way back to the unit." Scratching my head, I talked with the commanders for a moment, then returned to the platoon. The moment they saw my face, the comrades' eyes widened in disbelief, thinking I had disappeared for good. No one could have guessed I would return to the unit. Honestly, at that moment, a few guys even cursed me, asking why I was so stupid not to just disappear and why I came back here. Then the water for drinking, made from mango leaves, was poured out to boil fresh water for tea, and Duke made me a packet of instant noodles for dinner. Tea and tobacco are the best things for soldiers in the jungle. A few guys from Platoon 2 heard I was back and quickly ran over to visit and score some tobacco and tea. We sat and chatted until late at night before breaking up. Everyone returned to their bunkers to prepare for a restless night's sleep. I returned to my old bunker. Since I went to the hospital, Duck and Vin had been sharing it, but now only Duck was there because Vine had also gone to the hospital with malaria. Duck and I lay talking until his guard shift started. I didn't have to stand guard that night. I was given preferential treatment, but I couldn't sleep. Being here made me miss home and my girlfriend, so I went out to stand guard with Duck for company. The two of us whispered and chatted, missing our shift change. After the guard shift change, we went back into the bunker and continued talking until sleep finally overcame us. Enduring malaria and a little theft, returning to the unit, I truly felt the sacred and precious affection of my comrades. They welcomed me like a long-lost relative. This atmosphere of affection encouraged me and strengthened my resolve to continue working with the unit to complete difficult tasks. After this, the work continued. During this time, except for the comrades out on missions, those staying at the base had to constantly keep active to fight the malaria. So we exercised by reinforcing our trenches and bunkers. More importantly, 2 men were assigned daily to fetch water for the logistics team to cook, because there was no well where our unit was stationed. To get water, we had to go to the well at the regimental headquarters, and the distance from our position to the regimental headquarters well was about more than 2 kilometers. Another hardship was that it was the dry season, so fetching water was quite strenuous. Our tool for fetching water was a poncho folded in half and tied to a pole for 2 men to carry. But in reality, we loved being assigned this duty, because every time we went to fetch water, we took the opportunity to bathe and wash clothes. Otherwise, after days without bathing, our bodies would smell so bad that even our noses would want to stay away. And there's this delicate matter, the issue of stealing vegetables. At the time, there were a few rows of mustard greens planted by the regimental headquarters staff around the well, and they were lush and green. So every time we finished fetching water, we would sneakily wait for them to look away, break off a few leaves, hide them in the water, and bring them back to cook soup, adding 1 packet of instant noodles. It was delicious. Eventually, our water-fetching vegetable stealing was discovered. After that, every time we went up to fetch water, 1 man would coincidentally come out pretending to tend to the vegetable rows, but in reality he was there to guard the garden. One afternoon, seeing all officers from squad leader up being called for a meeting experience, told me that every time there was a meeting like this, my brothers and I would inevitably have to go on a long-term mission. At this time, our platoon only had about a dozen soldiers left, including the platoon leader, deputy platoon leader, and squad leaders. So counting the rank-and-file soldiers like us, there were only a few meager souls left. We were extremely short on manpower, but since it was an independent mission, we didn't know who to complain to. And the rumor mill had already picked up the scout frequency. Early the next morning, there was an order to go to logistics to receive food supplies, preparing to depart at noon. We didn't take rice, only dried rice plus dry rations, adding some cans of meat and fish, plus instant noodles, a few packets of soup powder, and then some water purification tablets. Besides a full load of guns and ammo, we also carried 4 extra boxes each, with 20 rounds of spare ammo put into the backpack or rucksack, and then we marched. There were no farewells or anything. Soldiers abstained from that, and whoever's mission it was, they just carried it out. When the 8 of us had just marched past the regiment headquarters for a short distance, we met some brothers from Regiment 250 carrying food supplies for the outposts on the upper line. So we joined up with those brothers from 250. Same route, so the troop number increased, making us feel more reassured. The marching formation then was spaced about 5 to 7 meters apart. Because it was the dry season, the forests had been burnt bare by our soldiers, the elephant grass burnt too, which felt somewhat safer because we could observe far. In return, after walking for just a while, everyone's face and clothes were black as soot, as if we had just crawled into a coal jar. That evening we rested at an outpost group of the brothers from Regiment 250. Again, the same old message: dried rice and canned fish. We had experience with this type of dried rice. Just pour a little boiling water over it evenly, then add a little soup salt, jump into the hammock, lie swinging while kneading it. About 20 minutes later, when it was pliable, it was edible. If mixed with water and eaten immediately, it was crumbly and very bland. The next day we continued marching with the brothers from the friendly unit. But by this time the number of troops was smaller because they had delivered goods to the outposts past. Now there were only about 15 to 17 people left, including us. Then we reached the territory of the final outpost of Regiment 250. Getting here, the road was even harder to travel because this was tropical jungle, not dipterocarp forest anymore. Parting ways with the friendly soldiers now, there were only the group of 8 of us, trudging in the jungle on the Cambodia-Thailand border. It felt so lonely and small somehow. Now every step we took had to be calculated carefully. If anything happened, only heaven could save us. And experience showed that usually nothing happened when going, only when returning were the brothers' subjective because of being near the unit, so there had been many cases of hitting mines. In this border jungle there were many trails, both old and new. There were times we had to be extremely careful, supporting each other to cross trails wide enough for ox carts, and the job of the soldiers behind was to erase all traces when crossing that road. At night we slept, finding places with dense vegetation to rest. Generally, all activities were silent, people biting sticks, horses removing bells, even personal hygiene. That meant taking a knife to cut a sod of earth, lifting it up, relieving oneself, and then putting it back exactly as before. As for paper wrappings of food used, they had to be stuffed into the backpack, only to be discarded when near the unit to prevent the enemy from discovering traces. If they chased us, then we could only run to the clouds. That day while walking, we heard the sound of an engine echoing in the distance. But in the forest it was very difficult to detect where it came from. After some discussion we decided to search. But the more we searched, the more lost it became. Okay, stop searching. When we skirted a mountain slope past the dense forest, we discovered in the distant clearing a line of people snaking along. Not knowing if they were civilians or enemies, because at that time we didn't carry binoculars. So skirting the mountain slope, we found a spot on a steep slope and rested there that night. Wandering around, admiring the forest and streams, eventually it was time to return according to plan. On the return trip, one late afternoon, water in the canteens ran out. Thirst came to us. If following the map, we had crossed many streams, but now there remained only dry, winding streaks. Continuing to trace on the map to find larger streams. Larger streams were actually easy to find then, but the trouble was that enemies were often encountered in these places. When we found a stream, we left some brothers on the bank to guard. Only 2 guys crept down to get water. Under the rock crevices there still remained some leftover puddles, but mosquito larvae and layers of rotting leaves covered nearly all of it. But no matter, just put it in the canteen and shove in a purification tablet, and it was all usable. Then we crossed the stream to the other side. Going up the bank, we crawled through a dense forest bush. But the further we went, the more the forest trees and vines seemed to want to wrap tightly around us. By then we were too tired, so the brothers discussed, okay, stop and rest here. Experience was that whenever traveling in small groups, we often looked for places with steep terrain or dense vegetation to crawl into and rest overnight. It was the safest. The next morning, the same old refrain: dried rice with soup salt. After eating, when we had just walked about 20 or 30 meters, the guy leading suddenly discovered a trail. The trail still bore fresh traces of people using it. The path was small, just enough for one person, but from the waist-up vegetation had been cleared to create a space, perhaps so that carrying loads wouldn't be hindered. After discussing and agreeing, we immediately decided to slip up a gentle slope above to easily observe. Then the 8 of us divided into 2 directions, east and west of the road, lying in ambush, about 20 meters apart to support each other. By about 9:00 a.m., still not a single soul passed by. At that time, we were intending to prepare to continue the journey back to the unit. Just right at that moment, Huyen, a soldier from a Huxwan Bin who was standing stretching his shoulders and neck, suddenly heard cho-cho sounds echoing from the west. Because the forest was dense, then we couldn't yet detect how many enemies there were, only hearing voices of both men and women. So he threw a clod of earth to signal the team in the east direction to lie back deep into the bushes about 10 meters from the ambush team in front to support the brothers in the front group from behind, only leaving 2 guys to guard the rear while 2 more went up with our ambush team. At that time we'd had agreed if we met a large enemy force, we would have to lie still and find a way to slip away fast. But if there were only a few guys, we would handle it depending on the situation. Time passed heavily. They had now arrived in front of the gun muzzles of the ambush team. We saw them very clearly. There were 3 males and 2 females. The 3 males leading had 2 K-63 rifles and 1 AK, while the 2 females didn't seem to have anything. Perhaps they were too subjective because they thought they were walking on land. They controlled, so they talked and laughed freely to their heart's content. Their guns were even slung over their shoulders, not held at the ready. So a few of us opened fire in almost all postures. The 3 male pot soldiers and 1 female pot soldier collapsed right in the first volley. The last female pot soldier, only about 4 meters from the group ahead, escaped. She darted straight into the forest, fast as a squirrel. Several bursts of gunfire chasing after her, didn't know if they hit the target or not.